Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Last video we talked about the evolution of the Stormtrooper. Today we'll be talking about another iconic design that has been repeated in Star Wars over and over again. The Star Destroyer. It's one of the first ships we see in the original Star Wars film, and in my opinion, one of the most beautiful and sleek designs in the entire franchise. It's no wonder Lucasfilms has brought it back time and time again. One day, humanity will finally get its act together and send a fleet to our neighboring systems to conquer, enslave, and strip mine their planets for resources. Hopefully when that happens, we'll be using wedge-shaped death machines. Hashtag humanity first. Anyway, on to the evolution of the Star Destroyer. Once again, we have to go back in time to the legendary Old Republic era to the Mandalorian Wars, which happened 4,000 years before Luke sent a proton torpedo up the poop chute of the first Death Star. As we mentioned in our last episode, the Mandalorians were a very diverse group of people whose culture revolved completely around warfare. Many of their weapons and vehicles were so well designed that they would later influence the designs of other Star Wars factions. Prior to 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Mandalorians were content on carrying out small raids on Outer Rim Republic outposts. But gradually, a movement known as the Neo-Crusaders began to grow amongst the Mandalorian ranks. They believed that in order for the Mandalorians to achieve great success, they would have to band together and be more disciplined. When the Mandalorian War broke out, legends has it the Mandalorian leader used the Neo-Crusaders as the vanguard against the Old Republic. Since the Neo-Crusaders were the spear point of the Mandalorian offense, their warships also looked like spears. Well, actually they kind of look like daggers, and if you look closely, they might remind you of another ship we're going to be talking about later. Now, not much is known about the specs of this ship, but we do know that it is equipped with anti-capital ship missiles and was used to board other Republic ships. What makes the Neo-Crusader ship so interesting is that it looks completely different from any other design in the Mandalorian fleet. Now, we later find out that the Mandalorian leader was influenced by a Sith Lord to start the war, so it's possible that there are some connections between the Neo-Crusaders and some Sith designs, but we'll talk about that later. In response to the Mandalorian onslaught, the Republic commissioned a new line of starships to supplement their Hammerhead cruisers. This was known as the Interdictor-class cruiser. These 600-meter-long ships were gigantic for the time and featured a huge offensive armament along with a large attachment of fighters. More importantly, it was one of the first known ships to feature an interdictor gravity well, which could pull ships out of hyperspace and prevent them from going into hyperspace. The triangle-shaped ship would become the precursor to many later wedge-shaped designs. After finally defeating the Mandalorian threat, the Jedi leader Revan fell to the dark side and took the Republic fleet along with several Interdictor-class cruisers with him to the Sith Empire. While in exile, Revan found a super weapon known as the Starforge. It could build endless amounts of ships, vehicles, and other war material using the power of a star. Revan used this forge, which essentially was a cheat code, to spawn an enormous fleet of Interdictor-class cruisers, which he would turn against the Republic. While all of this was going on, the Sith Emperor was quietly building the real invasion fleet, and at the center of it was the extremely beautiful Hedges-class dreadnought. This 800-meter behemoth was designed in the classic Sith wedge shape. It turns out the triangle-shaped design was a Sith design that goes as far back as 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, which predates even the Neo-Crusader Mandalorian ship we first talked about. Maybe the Sith Emperor gave the Neo-Crusaders that ship design. Who knows? Anyway, the Hedges-class dreadnought was designed not only as a warship, but also a troop carrier and could carry over 7,000 Sith troopers. Along with that, the Hedges-class dreadnought had a complement of 95 Mark VI supremacy fighters, along with 32 B-28 Extinction-class bombers and 35 shuttles. These exited the ship through its unique forward-facing dual hangar bays. The Hedges-class was more than just the capital ship. It was used as a forward operations base, a strategy that the Republic and the Galactic Empire would later adopt. For the next few thousand years, the Republic and Sith forces would battle each other, and ship designs wouldn't really drastically change all that much. For instance, the Republic Hammerhead cruiser, which saw action as early as 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, was still used 3,000 years later during the time of Darth Bane and the new Sith Wars. At the time, the Brotherhood of Darkness deployed the Sith Star Destroyer. We don't really have any images on the ship, but I'm guessing it was also in a wedge shape. Now, legends has it 10 years before the Clone Wars even began, a new line of wedge-shaped assault ships known as the Acclamator-class was already going through its testing phase. Designed to carry up to 16,000 clone troopers, several of these 752-meter-long ships were ready to go by the time the Jedi had found the clone army. But the Acclamator was more of a troop carrier than it was a true ship of the line. This is why the Republic created the Venator-class Star Destroyer, which oddly enough looks very similar to the Mandalorian warship we talked about earlier. The Venator-class also featured many similarities to the Sith dreadnoughts of old, which isn't surprising because a Sith Lord by the name of Darth Plagueis was the one who placed the order for these ships in the first place. The Venator-class was 1,137 meters long and carried up to 7,400 clone troopers. While it lacked the same amount of firepower that later Imperial Star Destroyers had, it more than made up for it with a huge complement of starfighters, which included 192 fighters, 192 interceptors, 36 long-range fighters, along with 40 gunships and a prefabricated garrison base. If anything, this rendition of the Star Destroyer was more of a carrier than it was a capital ship. The Republic Army by this point had fully embraced the idea of using Star Destroyers as forward operating bases for all of their battles. The Venator-class Star Destroyer would serve the Republic well for the next few years. It wasn't until the end of the Clone Wars that they introduced a new design known as the Victory-class Star Destroyer. At 900 meters long, the Victory-class Star Destroyer design is immediately recognizable to any Imperial Navy sailor, as it would become the template for all future Imperial Star Destroyers. With the Victory-class Star Destroyer, we see a shift away from capital ships that have a lot of fighters and weaker firepower to capital ships with less fighters and much more firepower. The one major flaw with the Victory-class was its underpowered propulsion system, which allowed smaller, faster ships to withdraw from combat. This was later remedied by the Mark II version of the ship. But that didn't really matter because that's when the Imperial Star Destroyer was first deployed. At over 1,600 meters, this deadly capital ship was equipped with just enough firepower to subdue an entire system or wipe out a small rebel fleet. It fully embraced the Imperial firepower first strategy by employing 60 heavy turbolasers, 60 ion cannons, and dozens of other auxiliary weapons emplacements. This more than made up for the Star Destroyer's small complement of short-range fighters and bombers. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer could transport an entire legion of stormtroopers along with all of their fun toys. The new order was a golden age for triangle-shaped ships. We saw many different creative designs, like the Immobilizer-class cruiser, which later led to the Interdictor-class Star Destroyer. Then there was the Super Star Destroyer classes like the Executor and the Eclipse, which were both several kilometers long. After the Battle of Jakku, the majority of the Imperial fleet was destroyed, but many Imperial-class Star Destroyers, along with the Emperor's Eclipse Super Star Destroyer, managed to escape to the Unknown Region, where they started the First Order. Many of the Imperial-class Star Destroyers would be refit with an automated maintenance system which would decrease the crew size. But the backbone of the First Order fleet was made up of the impressive Resurgent-class Star Destroyer. At 2,950 meters long, this massive warship had a stupid amount of firepower, with over 1,500 turbolasers. A number so high I had to triple check my sources. The Resurgence class had a massive crew of 74,000 people, but could only carry a surprising low number of stormtroopers, 8,000. The Resurgence class also carried a small complement of fighters with only 2 wings of TIE interceptors. But again, who needs TIE fighters when you have 1,500 turbolasers? Rounding out the First Order's ridiculous fleet is the Manticore 4 Siege Dreadnought. Last Jedi spoiler for about the next minute, so you're going to want to tune out. Okay, now you might remember seeing this dreadnought in the opening scene of The Last Jedi. At 7,669 meters long, this massive ship's main armament consisted of 2 giant autocannons which were used for attacking heavily fortified targets. And like with most gigantic weapons in Star Wars, the main weapon also happened to be the ship's weak point, something that Poe Dameron took full advantage of. When the dreadnought was destroyed, there were over 193,000 crew members on board, along with 22,000 stormtroopers. That's a lot of letters to write home to Mom and Dad. Well, actually, I think the First Order kidnapped kids to make into stormtroopers, so maybe didn't have to contact the parents. Now, the last ship we'll be talking about is Snoke's flagship Supremacy. At over 13 kilometers long and with a crew of over 2 million, this gigantic ship is getting close to Death Star 1 size. It was so big that it could dock and repair 8 Star Destroyers, 6 of them internally in hangar bays and 2 externally. Whereas most Star Destroyers were used as forward operating bases, the Supremacy was more like a First Order headquarters and shipyard. It did have a weakness, however, which was a purple-haired woman traveling at the speed of light in a Mon Calamari cruiser. Well guys, that's the evolution of the Star Destroyer. Let me know in the poll above which one is your favorite. Personally, I think there's something really special about the Harrower class from the Sith Empire. Its forward-facing hangar bay might not be ideal for combat, but it's just so pretty. I also really like the classic ISD. Well guys, don't forget to hit that subscribe and notification button and like us on Facebook so you don't miss out on tomorrow's episode, which will continue our Star Wars Evolution series. Comment below if you think you know what we're going to cover. Well guys, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.